Okay, well, Vanessa, let's move to Tony Blair then. Another British, well, not quite sure whether I should say any more about Tony Blair, but what have you got? Because you've discovered connections to the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Tony Blair's influence in events in the Middle East has been ongoing for decades, including, of course, most notoriously the war against Iraq, which set up the regime change war against Syria, which we've discussed many times on UK Column. But I want to start with this very short clip, which demonstrates exactly the agenda behind Tony Blair and the collective that he represents in the summer Davos in China when he's asked the following question by the interviewer.
First, for hearing your perspective on the geopolitical and geoeconomic situation. Could it have been more complicated, the geopolitical situation that we're seeing today?
Well, we'd be kind of out of business if it wasn't so.
I mean, I have to say, the interviewer also asks him about the complex situation in the Middle East. And again, he giggles. It's very hard to watch this guy now. But interestingly, yes, I did find out in the last few days that actually Tony Blair was largely responsible for setting off or initiating the Abraham Accords discussions. This is in the Jewish News, which is based in London, the London genesis of the Abraham Accords. And what does it actually say? That in 2015, in an interview in the Israeli media last weekend, it was Tony Blair who revealed that back in 2015, so this was before President Trump was elected for his first term, he first introduced Prime Minister Netanyahu's trusted consigliere, Yitzhak Molcho, to an Emirati cabinet minister in London. It then goes on to show that by the end of 2016, so that was the very beginning of Trump's first administration, the same UAE minister met Netanyahu, who was then introduced to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed. 2018, Netanyahu visited Abu Dhabi twice on an Israeli flight that crossed Saudi airspace. So it does appear that Tony Blair set or created the groundwork ready for Trump's first administration that brought in the Abraham Accords through Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Blair also in the same article points out that bin Zayed, in his opinion, showed exceptional political and leadership talent, and Netanyahu is a remarkable politician, of course, conducting genocide in Gaza and the West Bank as we speak. So in 2020, basically the UAE, which was a former British protectorate, which perhaps explains Tony Blair's focus on the UAE, the Abraham Accords, unlocking sustainable and inclusive growth across the Middle East. But what does this actually mean? This is Tony Blair's statement on the actual signing, which was published up at his Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. And if we actually look at what his statement said, for many years, I and my institute team have worked on deepening relationships between Israel and the Arab world. Of course, the Arab world basically means the Arab Gulf states, Jordan and Egypt. I had long come to the conclusion that if we want to see a fair resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian issue on the basis of two states, there had to be a complete reversal of the idea that the Arab world should refuse contact with Israel until a peace agreement was made. So apparently the resistance should desist, and boycotts and divestment should also not be allowed. He then goes on in published up at the Tony Blair Institute, how the Abraham Accords are shaping a new technological covenant. Now, this is where it does get slightly interesting. It's very clear that the collaboration with UAE in particular is focused very much on a digital authoritarian global dictatorship. So UAE is concentrating on becoming a front runner in more secure smart cities, driverless taxis, smart pods and eco houses, networks of sensors and camera data gathering services, and in very strong cybersecurity. All of this, of course, created in collaboration with Israel, but also with China. He then goes on to point out again in the same statement or article up at the Tony Blair Institute. So the next chapters will tell stories of the possibilities of turning the region into a global powerhouse of fintech capability through uniting Israeli tech innovation with the UAE's financial expertise. I'll leave you to translate that, leading the way in a new Abrahamic covenant for the technological area. So, of course, that means central bank, digital currency, etc. But let's have another look at the UAE that was involved in the Saudi, Israeli, US and UK war against Yemen since 2015. And in fact, I've written numerous times about the UAE black sites in southern Yemen using US-style torture against Yemeni civilians, quite horrific reports from that for at least the last 5 years. And of course, they were involved in the targeting of the Yemeni civilians in partnership with Israel and Saudi Arabia. But then also, I looked into the digital authoritarianism in the UAE and across the board. This is an article linked to Chatham House, but almost all of the Western elite-linked think tanks have written about the danger of UAE's digital authoritarianism, which includes, of course, the use of elements like the Pegasus spyware, which was developed by Israel, and the spy unit 8200 to spy on dissidents, gather information, which, of course, in the UAE then immediately leads to their arrest. There's a lot of information about this online. But the Abraham Accords, of course, then led to the Abraham Shield Plan, which, again, we've covered here on UK Column. It's a coalition basically to ensure the genocide and the extermination of Palestinians, the creation of the dystopian state that, again, we've talked about, Palestinians being confined to ever-reduced landmass concentration camps, the sale of their land or giving of their land into a trust, and then basically their displacement from Palestinian land into neighboring countries. And last week, of course, we talked about Tony Blair's staff who took part in the Gaza Riviera project with BCG. BCG, of course, is the company that was managing the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, American private military contractors who were running the humanitarian aid for Palestinians that, of course, is being used by Israel to effectively massacre more Palestinians coming into smaller and smaller areas to gather aid. And I remind everybody to have a look at the Blair Bush project in Syria that brought al-Qaeda to power, because this connects everything. So it shows very clearly that what Tony Blair is tasked with is creating a digital surveillance oppressive bloc using the Gulf countries, the Arab Gulf countries, and basically harnessing the countries that are prepared to normalize with Israel to create what I think is a very dangerous development block of all of these concepts to enslave humanity now and in the future, and of course who are deeply connected, as we've said before, to the British state, to the US and to EU states. So I want to end with another section, and I apologize for inflicting this upon all of you, but this is Tony Blair still at the summer Davos, China event, talking about his view of governance. So let's have a look at this.
You know, you do a poll in the Middle East, by the way, of young people across the whole of the Middle East and ask them, which country do you want your country to be most like? The answer is, I think, virtually every year comes back the UAE. Yeah. So, you know, this is, and that's not a coincidence, by the way. It's because of the way the governance has been. And one of the reasons why, you know, my institute works in almost 50 countries across the world today. And one of the fascinating things is that everyone always thinks their situation is unique, and of course in a way it is, but whichever country you go to, most of all what people want is the opportunity to do well, right, if they work hard, to have peace and stability, to raise their family with some chance of a decent future, and that's the same wherever you go. And the key to it is good governance that is open-minded itself, that is effective in providing opportunity for people and is connected to the world.
Do we have that kind of governance in the UK? I wonder. But it's also, I think, very interesting that the UAE is being set up as the flagship of this new digital totalitarianism. And the fact that the countries that are being targeted, which are effectively Iran, Syria, of course, that we know has already fallen into organized chaos, and Lebanon, or at least the Lebanese resistance, all have or had independent financial systems, independent from the World Bank, independent from Western influence and interference. We've talked about Hezbollah having the non-usury bank where people bring their gold, leave their gold for a period of time until they pay back the loan, and then they can collect their gold. Iran has independent banking. Syria had independent banking. Of course, now it's being sold by Tom Barrack, the economic hitman for Trump, into debt enslavement through the IMF, etc., and various monetary funds, just as Egypt and Jordan have been sold previously. So it's, for me, very interesting. And I think what it demonstrates very clearly is that the war is not only against the resistance in the West Asia region and in Iran, it is literally against all of us, because if Tony Blair is harnessing the Arab Gulf state to basically bring in this kind of digital tyranny, then it's certainly going to affect us. And Israel is already part of that complex and is already embedded in our own state structure.
Vanessa, thank you very much for that. Any thoughts, Charles?
I think it absolutely hits the nail on the head, Vanessa. You're quite right, and in a way, always a difficult person to talk about. He sort of seems to be everywhere, and people still seem to listen to him, which I think to anybody who's followed his career over the last 30 or 40 years could be and should be completely mystified by.